I appreciate that. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks everyone for spending their lunch break with us today. And thank you to the Providers Council for hosting this. This is a workshop / discussion that's very near and dear to my heart because we have found that these organization design role clarity projects that we do bring about some of the most positive impact with organizations. And the real profound approach in this is building a management model or gamifying management. And we're going to walk you through some high level thinking as to some of the things that we see and hear as part of our projects, and then give you a very specific tool, which is kind of our foundational tool in org design that reveals itself in so many different ways. So we have a small group, which is awesome when you're dealing with org design discussions, because you may have a ton of questions based off of some of the things I'm going to go through. So given the group size, we'll probably talk for 25, 30 minutes, and then feel free to ask any questions that you want. And if the group is small, we'll be able to dive into some of those things, maybe at a more customized level too. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and start in on some of the conversations. And I know that, the human services world is really undergoing a significant amount of change, and that's probably putting it lightly. But a lot of the things that we're seeing affecting the ecosystem have to do with rapid advancements in technology. I think part of this progress in technology is allowing us as leaders to manage at scale more effectively. And because we can do that, that's part of the reason we're seeing so much market consolidation happening right now. There's a lot of merger and affiliation activity. That's part of the reason, due to technology and affording that ability at scale, but it's also due to the changes in funding. So there's a lot of challenges with trying to forecast revenues, program dollars from the state level. And so that's created a lot of obstacles. And, part of that during COVID led to a restructuring where we saw organizations expand and contract, whether they had to lay staff off or furlough them. And now they may be trying to bring them back. And there's this kind of rapid expansion and contraction of operations. And so if you're in the process of hitting the reset button, this is going to be a great discussion for you today. And one of the other things that we're seeing a lot of is the competitive levels of going after and acquiring talent. Whether you're competing with the Amazons of the world paying more on an hourly basis, or whether you're competing with some of your peer organizations, that coupled with high vacancy rates, which we saw coming into the pandemic, which is still not rebounded fully to the need for new types of positions that we might not fully understand yet. And then the cost of talent is definitely on the rise, and the more sophisticated levels of talent you need, the higher costs that those are bringing. And so this ecosystem is creating a need to organize or restructure. And we always look at role clarity as a way to do that. And so some of the indicators or reasons organizations would need to structure, or on projects that we enter into, they may have gone through this rapid period of growth. Maybe it was over the last 10 or 20 years where they just hired and they brought people in, and there was no thought to the logic as to how the organization was designed or connected. Or maybe they just came off a transformational strategic planning project, and they want to do things differently, and that has an impact on the business model. And how do you design around that? Or you're bringing on a new electronic health record system or enterprise platform that would require certain shifts or changes in role function. Or right out of COVID, you get a workforce reduction, and then you need to staff back up. And do you staff back up in the same way, or do you look to do something different? Or perhaps some organizations are considering mergers and affiliations, and after that deal is transacted, there's always a discussion around, well, how do we integrate, right? And that becomes a big opportunity to get things right. Or your business model is changing due to technology, whether you've been pushed to a virtual model for certain levels of care, and that has an impact on how you're designed and the different roles that may be needed at the table. So these are all different reasons to consider organization design work. And this is the org design model that we use. It's called the STAR model by Jay Galbraith. And as you can see, the 5 points of the star in dark blue really are given context and meaning by what strategic direction you're heading in. Now, the reason that we bring this up is that this has, this would be a global project for org design, but you can see how many different components of role clarity are in here, whether that be the talent that you're needed, the talent that you need, the capabilities that you need, the type of structure by which they would be reporting into, or their expectations of qualifications or expertise based around systems or processes. So a lot of different factors arrive from just creating simple role clarity for one individual, a team, a department, or the organization as a whole, right? And so as we get into this role clarity discussion, the desired outcome here is improved performance. Part of the way we achieve that is by getting people hyper-focused in their jobs. The larger you become, the more specializations you start to realize. And the more clear and hyper-focused team members are, individuals are in their roles, the more they can produce, right? Because you may have to take things off their plate to get them hyper-focused in key areas. But if they're producing, then actually morale goes up in an organization, because production is the basis of morale. So not only does creating role clarity help to increase performance, but overall staff morale. Now, there's one thing that we hear a lot of in a lot of our projects is that, we don't have the depth of talent, and we don't have the bench strength. And so part of creating role clarity is really understanding, how do you build that? And in org design, there's different things that you need to factor in for hierarchies and structures and things of that nature. And that would consume an entire other workshop. But I think the thing to point out here that's most effective that we've seen for improving the bench strength and succession planning is to create this concept between a coach and a mentor. And those are two different things, and they're also two different people. So when we're looking at creating depth within an organization, we install this concept. And a coach, very simply, is a direct supervisor. So it'd be considered the boss, right? And that person is coaching towards job performance, and they are coaching towards career development. The mentor position is something entirely different. Their focus is career advancement. And so that actually can't be your boss. If you think about it, your mentor can't be your boss because they don't have the objective view to move you into their seat. So typically in org design, the principle is called the manager once removed, or your boss's boss. Their role becomes a mentor. And as a mentor, their sole focus is on career succession and understanding how and where you want to move up, lateral, et cetera, how to best deploy that talent, and then work with your manager to be able to do that. So again, we could create a whole other workshop based off of that concept, but that is something that the role clarity piece, which we're going to discuss in a bit, starts to help build a bridge and a plan towards. So just as we hear a lot about, I need to increase my bench strength and conduct succession planning, we also hear a ton about we need to increase capacity. This is a definite byproduct of the work that we do, but we look at it a little differently. Some folks and leaders that we work with will think of capacity as, I need to add staff, I need to add people in key positions. And our initial approach is really to look at the things being done and how do we create capacity within what you already have. before we add anybody else. And in most of our projects, we have found a significant amount of FTE equivalents worth of time that we're able to then fill with additional value-based activity. And then the other question is what do we need for future talent? Now this is a little bit more challenging of a conversation because there's more unknowns here. So as we get into working with clients and thinking through, what the structure should look like, we may be questioning, well, what talent is needed for the future? But a lot of it starts with, do we have the right people in the right seats now? And then what do we need that we may not have seats for that we have to create? Okay, both of those questions, both of those discussions are very challenging because that's when you're usually dealing with the highest level of change. So part of the tool that we're going to kind of walk through and talk through in this workshop is also a staffing assessment. And as you watch your team go through some of these things and some of these steps, it starts to reveal information that feeds that. Do we have the right people in the right seats? And what do we need for new seats or new talent? Because the overall goal of increasing role clarity is developing the team, all right? But it's not only about developing the team, it's about developing the clarity at an organization, at a division, department, at a team, and an individual level. And we typically achieve that starting with the individual, because that will, as you will see, create a lot of transparent issues to consider, or issues brought forth from this assessment tool that we're going to walk you through. As we think through some of the goals that come from increasing talent, part of those are things like developing functional clarity. Now, when we say functional clarity, we mean particular job functions. So a function would be like marketing, HR, finance, operations, right? Residential programming. Those would all be types of functions. And so you'll hear me use that word a lot throughout some of this. And that's what we're talking about. And as organizations get big, what we've seen is kind of this blending or intertwining of functions and people wearing multiple hats and maybe they have 2 or 3 different job functions that they're responsible for, and they're totally separate things. And they have to be looked at separate because if you're going to increase capacity and grow, that kind of needs to be teased apart. And as you do that, part of the goals of developing this role clarity is that increased in performance we talked about. And one of the byproducts of doing this exercise is that you're doing it with your team in a specific way that builds ownership because they're co-creating it with you. You being a supervisor, a leader, a manager. Part of what we're going to instill is a level of increased accountability. And that's going to come from some of the final things that we're going to talk about today. But overall, we want them to be producing obviously positive outcomes that generate momentum for the organization, whether that's from the standpoint of resources or impact to those being served. And then the team needs to function together, right? So if there's any kind of disruption in the harmony of how the team functions, pulling this apart and teasing this apart from a role clarity standpoint helps to identify some of those root causes that, where the team may not be operating as effectively as they could. So the exercise and the tool that we're going to walk you through is called the job post. And this was something that we created as part of our work in org design. And what we realized quickly when we were combing through hundreds and hundreds of different types of job descriptions is that they are vague and they are lofty. They're a great tool for HR because they have a risk component to it. But when you get into using them in a management sense to create your management model or gamify management, they don't really work that well. If you think of a job description, probably the last time you may have looked at yours was when you were first hired, right? It's usually got 65 bullet points. And, one of them says, I got to lift 35 pounds. And, another one says, I got to smile. And then everybody's favorite, do whatever else my boss says. And so that job description is something that's not prioritized in a way that adds value to you as a manager. So we created this post and this post process, which are going to walk you through the details of exactly how we do it to get people hyper focused. And as a result, we have seen incredible changes. We've recently worked with a large university where we had saved them millions of dollars in some of the things that we had discovered, as well as worked with human service agencies to increase their effectiveness, but also to identify cost savings. And it's a very simple tool, and it will actually appear too simple, but it's actually the process that you work through with your team that reveals a lot of the value. And we're about to get into that in a second. But part of the value of doing this as a team is stepping out of your organization to work on it, right? As you think about this activity or focusing on any type of organization design activity, you're allowing yourself the time and space to step away out of your day-to-day and work on the organization or your department or your team or your own position as a leader in this. And that time is incredibly valuable. And where we initially spend it on our org design projects is building this job post. And a job post consists of three things. It consists of the primary purpose of the function. Right? So if you think of the function, could be the CEO function, the marketing function, the chief operating officer function. What is the purpose of that? Right? The next thing it is what are the top 5 key activities? Right? If you go back to your job description, if you have 65 bullet points and everything is important, then nothing is. Right? So how do I harness that down to 5 core things that deliver the most value to that purpose? And then lastly is how do I measure success? I can't create accountability. I can't create a management model unless I understand the measurements of those key roles. All right. So we're going to jump in right now. And just as a quick side note, on the last slide, I'm going to provide my email address. If you're interested in getting the workbook with this post activity, these 8 steps, I'm happy to PDF that over to you so you can shoot me an email. So the first step you think of, you're going to get a bunch of your staff in a room. Okay, that could be your direct reports, it could be a department, it could be anybody. And you're going to go through this activity with them. And the activity is about creating role clarity, but it's going to give you a ton of insight, which I'll talk about through each of these steps as a leader, as a manager. The first part of this is very laborious, right? Usually if we've got groups in a room, they're putting Post-it notes up on a room, up on a wall, or if they're using an Excel spreadsheet, if we're doing it virtually, is to identify all the responsibilities and tasks that you do. So you can think about writing that down. You might have might be wallpapering the wall with so many Post-it notes. But what people put down and what their core, what their initial answers are very telling. Now, one of the questions that we always get 100% of the time to this step is, what level of detail do you want? And we never answer that question, because we want to see where people go with what they put. Are they looking at it from a strategic, operational, tactical point of view, or everything in between? And a lot of the responses that they give, tell us a lot about that position. Right? We've had certain people in certain functions, after they got through this activity, really not understand their job definition very well. And they were kind of all over the place, and it came across as part of this very simple initial step. All right. So that's the long part. That usually takes 30 minutes to 45 minutes to be able to do for the team. And then we're walking them into the second step, which is to identify the top 5 things that take the most amount of time. Now we're getting into capacity. So of their list, and let's say they had 44 items on their list here, they're going to identify what are the top 5 things that take the most amount of time. Number 1 being number 1, down to number 5. And they can only have 5. The idea behind this is for you as a manager to see what is consuming your team's time. Okay, and we're going to revisit this in a few slides, and I'm going to show you how we're going to use this particular piece of information here. All right. So after they do that, and kind of, the time activity is kind of setting them up for a bigger discussion to come. we need something to contextually glue everything together, right? If you think of when you do strategic planning or when your board first got together to create your organization, they needed a mission statement, right? They needed something to glue everything together so that we would ensure some guardrails. Well, we're going to do the same thing with a job post, is we're going to create a primary purpose for the function. Now, the benefit of doing this is you start to move, the more you talk about function with your team, you start to move away from talking about people, right? Because it's the people that can create the confusion when you start to deal with, restructuring an organization. Well, this person doesn't really like to report to this person, but that's where it belongs. This function belongs. And so when you move the conversation to the functional category, you avoid talking about the people. That helps you logically design an organization. And it starts with looking at the post as to who do you serve and what value you create. Those two things make up the purpose statement. Okay, so think of it like creating a mission statement for a particular job. So the piece that's important to pay attention to here is the who do you serve. Now, what we see as part of this, specifically with management or anybody in a management position, is everybody wants to serve the individuals that are being taken care of by the organization. But that's not actually who managers serve. Managers serve their direct reports, and as an outcome, their direct reports improve service to individuals being served. And that's something to pay attention to as you go through and you're working this with your teams is, who do you serve and what value you create? Because leaders, managers, especially if you're managing a large department, really need to be looking at policy and systems and processes and team alignment and, and functional alignment and things of that are going to improve the working in ecosystem, we'll call it, versus direct care, right? And those two things are very different, right? I'm enabling my staff who do direct care to work more effectively because now they have the resources, the tools, and things of that nature, and the talent to be able to do that. And that was my role as a manager. And you'll see some of that get flushed out in designing this purpose statement. So, the top part of this workbook here is really kind of just to write down some notes as to who do you serve and what value you create. But then what we ask them to do is to create that purpose statement that we're going to glue the rest of this post to. So after they go through that process and they have a statement for their function, okay, we're going to then circle back to those task activities and where they spend the most amount of their time. Now that we have a purpose to this function, we're going to say what we would like you to do is identify the top 5 things that are the highest priority in fulfilling that purpose. And what we find is that sometimes there's a disconnect there's a real disconnect between where they're spending their time and where the real value is for fulfilling that role. Now, this is where you get tremendous insight. So for example, if you're working with one individual and you find that they're wasting all of their time in a non-value added activity, you as a leader, you as a manager can decide to eliminate that or reduce the time burden to that in some way, shape, or form. But if you're meeting with your entire team and you identify 2 or 3 common trends that are consuming a lot of time across your whole team, you may have a systemic issue that needs to be dealt with. Okay. And this is where you create that capacity or added FTE positions. Because if I free people's time up, let's say, I have 2,000 hours in a work year, right? But I spend 500 on these 2 things that just constantly waste my time. Well, a quarter of my time can be freed up. I need to know how to backfill that time that I now have. Okay. And you as a manager and a leader need to help me figure that out. Because if we free up our time and we don't have high priority activities to fulfill that, then it gets filled with non-value added activities, right? And that's really important to understand. So you may say that you want to expand their role or expand where their time is being allocated based off what they're currently doing. And you're going to take some stuff off their plate so they can do more of that. Or if you want to add new things, they need to understand that as well. And this difference between where I spend my time versus where the priorities at creates a tremendous amount of insight for you to come in and look at where duplication exists, where redundancy exists, where there are big gaps, where there's fires, et cetera. So just this one small activity reveals a significant amount about the individual, about the team, or even the department. And then we ask the team members participating in this activity to developing their job posts, say, okay, well, you went through this activity, and so what are your 5 priorities that fulfill that purpose? And memorialize those here in the job post, so we understand, like, what are those priorities, because everything can't be important, and so we need to be able to focus that right to the core of that, that being. Then we get into step 6, and this is probably one of the more difficult. This is a very easy step if you're in a job function like marketing or development, a numbers related game. But when you get into the operations side of human service agencies, this becomes a very difficult conversation. So it's a very important one, and for several reasons. Number one, as you're going through, you want to design success measures. These are key performance indicators, right? So think of metrics. These are metrics that are going to let you know how an individual is doing, the trends at which they're doing, et cetera. So part of what needs to be put in place here is that any metric given to somebody, they have to have control over, right? They have to be able to influence moving the needle up or down on that key performance measure, because if they don't, then it's unfair to evaluate them based off that. What this also does is create accountability, because now I understand how to win the game, right? I'm in a position, I can gamify this by saying I have 3 statistical measures. I know how to increase those. I know how to win at my game. My morale goes up, thus my accountability to performance goes up. But what it does for the manager or the leader is it gives you the tools to manage your team with less emotion and more career development. So you think about it, I'm creating this level of clarity that I've got my primary purpose, my top 5 key activities. Now I've got 2 or 3 units of measure that I can work with them on and coach them on, right? So when we're looking at a trend, and maybe that trend is a graph, with a line trending up, and we can say, well, okay, well, you're moving up in all areas. That's great. What did you do, and how do we do more of that, right? And it gives you those after action review conversations. Or, things are trending down and they're not looking so good. What happened? What are we doing? Should we do less of that? And it really creates intentional conversations with your team. But this is one of the more difficult things to scope in a job post. So lastly, is you're going to work with your team members to be able to create a post, and simply they look like this. The function, who sits in that role, primary purpose, top 5 key activities, and 3 success measures. And it's a very simple tool, but the process of getting to it creates a lot of clarity for you as a leader. Now you've got this sitting here, and it helps to gamify management. So when I think about a post like the marketing manager, and I put this together for the Providers Council, assuming the Providers Council has a chief marketing officer, marketing manager, right? Their primary purpose could be this, right? CEOs of human service agencies in New England interested in the Providers Council. Now, their job is to create interest that will drive them to a point of action. They actually can't control the individual's action, but they can influence interest, right? And they're going to do that through these 5 key activities. And how do I know they're effective at their job? Is because we have a pipeline of potential new members. We have a high conversion ratio of potential members into members. We have high event attendance, whether that's workshop, webinar, in-person events, et cetera. And those may be, you may have different metrics and different stats that go along, but those might be the core of, engagement and interest. So at the end of the day, you've got a job post that helps you interact and engage with those that you work with. Now, there's one thing to mention, is that if this was a job post for, let's say, a program director, right? And let's say I have 20 program directors that manage 20 different congregate housing programs. You may get them in a room and do this activity with all 20. And you get to the end and you find out that, wow, I've got 20 different people interpreting their jobs 20 different ways. Right? Now, that's a nightmare and a disaster for a manager versus I have 20 people, but I only manage one post, one job function. That's all I manage. Maybe I'm the vice president and I manage 20 program directors. So understanding that concept is critical, because if you have 20 of the same function and they all have a different context or viewpoint for their job, you can't create any management system from that or any kind of standardization because of the way people are interpreting their jobs. So this activity allows you to level set that, build a single post, build the agreement and ownership around what that should entail. What it's also going to do is it's also going to delineate between the layers of an organization. So we've worked with a few organizations, one in particular that comes to mind. They had a vice president of residential programming. They had several senior vice presidents. And then each of those senior vice presidents oversaw, each of those senior program directors oversaw a group of program directors. So they had 3 layers. But when we got them in a room together, it was like looking at the identical post. So as people get promoted up, they don't understand how to change the strategic nature of their position. So what you get is a VP operating as a program with a program director mindset versus a more strategic mindset that will allow them to kind of better improve how things are functioning, right? And so that's been a result of a lot of what we do is the differentiation of layers of management. And that really comes into who do you serve, back to that primary purpose. And it flushes out so much detail that you start to then see the things that you need to resolve at an individual level, a team level, organization level, and even a department level. So the benefits to org design are many. And, I think obviously we want to try to increase performance as a result of this and create accountability, right? So the post exercise will help do that once it's implemented. It will also create more efficient work because you're technically streamlining how people work. And ideally it will be, a reduction in the levels of duplication. One of the big things that we'll do, and I kind of, warn everybody about this at the beginning of any project that we work on, is it is going to create a very black and white picture of who is productive versus who is busy. Okay. And those that look busy but aren't productive are going to stand out because those folks tend to have an allergic reaction to accountability. And as you implement tools that increase the level of accountability, that starts to stand out. Now, as you make the moves in restructuring or creating clarity, maybe you're thinking about, what seats are needed, or do we have the right people in the right seats? Those decisions start to lead towards a very positive impact on culture, because the team starts to see that those producing, those that have a high level of performance are being rewarded or recognized, and those that aren't are standing out and being addressed as part of this type of staffing assessment tool. And so really at the end of the day, the job post exercise is about creating clarity, accountability, and performance. And, if they're performing, then production's the basis of morale, and morale in the team goes higher. And this is a stepping stone, or I will say kind of a linchpin to our organization design work and projects that we do. And it's a highly effective tool that results in a lot of different things from one very simple process. So I got my email here, eric@curtisstrategy.com. If you'd like the workbook, I'm happy to send that PDF over to you so you have that 8-step process. Please feel free to shoot me an email. I would welcome any questions that you may have.